Ethiopia is hailed as the model for the rest of the Africa to follow, there is no democracy. We were surprised that if you try to speak to media, there is no media. Most of the independent journalists are either in exile or behind bars. There is no civil society. The proclamation has decimated the civil society that can monitor human rights. The anti-terrorism law has become the tool to stifle all dissent. It does not conform to international standards. But what was most shocking for us as an independent think tank, that God forbid, if Sudan was doing this, if Mugabe was doing this in Zimbabwe, the Western nations would stand up and say something.
Just since November 2015, more than 200 innocent Oromos were killed, and the world is still silent.
We, as a community, have to be empowered, and as much as we preach for human rights and do a lot of advocacy, we have to build political power. That's just how things get done, whether it's domestically or internationally.
Just since November 2015, more than 200 innocent Oromos were killed, and the world is still silent. According to the Amnesty International, I Am Oromo, Because I'm Oromo book, 5,000 Oromos arrested between 2011 and 2014. According to the former president of Ethiopia, who ruled the country by the term he leaves the office, there were 25,000 innocent Oromos in Ethiopian notorious prison. One of the former ruling person in the administration who went to jail for corruption once said, the prison speaks Oromo. If you don't speak Oromo or you go to prison, you end up learning Oromo and come out because of the size of Oromos in that prison system. So here is a challenge. What should be done more or different for the international community to keep Ethiopia, minority in power, accountable? What should be done different? There should be a clear understanding of who the Oromo people are. Oromo people are the largest in the country. There are many ethnic groups that lives in Oromia region. There is no single Oromo you could find that lives in other regions where these minorities come from. You can see from this, Oromos are welcoming. If you see in Oromia region, not the way the government portrays, we are the welcoming society. And thousands of people from other regions of Ethiopia live in Oromia land. So this forum is to highlight genocide and daylight mass execution that is happening in many parts of Ethiopia. As you see from the brochure, the forum is packed. It's, the whole day. We encourage you to stay and be part of. We have human rights experts, human rights advocates, and representatives that will be speaking. We will forge the next steps together and find a way for the sake of justice for innocents that are daily murdered and in notorious prison. Before I conclude, I would like to thank the following groups for tirelessly working on exposing the human rights records of Ethiopian government. Amnesty International, we are so much thankful for that. Human Rights Watch, Auckland Institute, the European Union, Congressman Keith Ellison office, Congressman Betty McCallum office, Congresswoman Betty McCollum office, sorry, Congressman Tom Emmer office. We need to thank this group for their hard work with us. And also, we, the Oromo people in diaspora, need to keep our representatives accountable. We should demand more from our representatives who have no time for their constituent concerns, who smiles but take no concrete action, who are insensitive and not care too much about our concerns. They come to you, they knock at you. This is the time for Oromo people. If we're gonna be a voice for the voiceless, we need to keep them accountable for them. We are lacking that in the Minnesota delegation. So we need to keep that fore and front and work toward that, to be a voice. And I finally would like to thank you all and call you to action. Now it is my great honor to introduce to you our guest of honor for this morning. This is a great honor, at the same time privilege, to do that and to know the depths of what Auckland Institute has done for Oromo people in terms of fact-finding, data-driven, and particularly to have intimate, most recent conversations with the leadership of Auckland Institute. The person I would like to introduce to you is Anura Mittal, founder and executive director of the Auckland Institute, expert on trade, development, human rights, and agriculture issues. Recipient of several awards, Anura Mittal were named as the most valuable thinker by the Nation magazine. Since 2011, the Institute, under Anura leadership, has unveiled land investment deals in the developing world, which revealed a disturbing pattern of a lack of transparency, fairness, and accountability. Mittal has authored and edited numerous books and reports. These include Ethiopia and Anti-Terrorism Law. That is, you all get a copy of that. There is so much meat in there for you to dig through, for us to really advocate well. And we say the land is not yours, breaking the silence against forced displacement in Ethiopia, engineering ethnic conflict, the toll of Ethiopian plantation development on southern people, the long shadow of war, and many other books. Today it's my great honor. Anura Mittal is amongst us. So I invite Anura to address the audience. If you join me in welcoming Anura to the stage. Thank you so much.
So I bring you regards from everyone at the Oakland Institute in California. My name is Anuradha Mittal. Today I also bring you a message from this young man, an Anuak man who I have come to know very well. His name is Obok Akwe-Ochala. He said to me that when I come here, I should say this: take my regards on behalf of the family to thank my fellow Oromo brothers and sisters for their good work. Let peace and love be upon them as they work together and with the others for a better future, which we all should be proud of. So as I said, these greetings are from a young man, Obok Akwe-Ochala, who came to the United States in December 2013 as a refugee. after having spent half of his life as a refugee in Kenya, he had to flee his country as a 12-year-old boy after the 2003 massacre of the Anuaks in the Gambela region. His father, Okello Akwe-Ochala, was the governor of Gambela region at the time of the massacre. Being an Anuak himself, he too had to flee. He found shelter in Kenya and then in Norway. In March 2014, when Mr. Okello was visiting South Sudan, his family members, the survivors of the massacre, the Ethiopian security forces kidnapped him and renditioned him. Not extradited, but they kidnapped and renditioned this man. He has been charged as a terrorist and remains languishing in the jails for almost 2 years now. There has been no evidence presented by the government of his terrorist activities. The only evidence is a self-confession obtained from Mr. Okello after solitary confinement and torture. I'm sure you're not surprised by Mr. Okello's story. For every Mr. Okello, there is Pastor Omot, there's Bekele Garba, there's Iskandar Nega. The list is way too long for any country to feel comfortable. I work at the Oakland Institute, which is a policy think tank. And very often, the government of Ethiopia is very upset with us. They call us a terrorist group. They say we have a political agenda about Ethiopia. I want to first tell you how come we came about to work on Ethiopia. In 2007 and 2008, we saw this trend, what is known as land investment. Foreign investors were being encouraged to go into African nations, take up 99-year-long leases. The claims were this will bring development to the people, this will bring food security, this will bring infrastructure, it'll create jobs, it's going to be the new development miracle. We were looking at countries across Africa. We were looking at South Sudan, Tanzania, Sierra Leone, Mali, and Ethiopia, and many other countries. That are these assumptions true? We had our field researchers in Gambela, in South Lower Omo. We had our people researchers looking at this impact of the so-called land investment. What does it mean when Karaturi from my country, the largest rose grower, goes to Gambela? Does it bring prosperity to the people of Gambela? We wanted to know. We wanted to really know when Ruchi Soya, from my country again, when Indian Exim Bank promotes this so-called development and is getting these huge land deals all over the country, is it really bringing prosperity? Is it really South-South cooperation? What we found in Ethiopia was absolutely horrifying. Absolutely horrifying. While the investment agency boasts that it has over 15 million hectares of land to give away to foreign investors, this land is not unused. What we found is that people are being forcibly displaced, that there is no free, prior, informed consent. We found communities are being tortured, raped, intimidated as they're being forced from their forests, their farms, their rivers, and being pushed into areas where there's nothing in the name of villagization. We found that when the Suris in Lower Omo refused to move, the government will pay another ethnic group to have violent clashes. And Suris were massacred, just like the Anuaks were massacred in 2003. Just this past month, as the Anuaks have been massacred, and the government says, it's the Nuers. These are just ethnic tribes. They know no better. They fight with each other. But the hidden hand of the Ethiopian government, the minority which controls it, which wants to take away the resources of the poorest people, so it can talk about the double-digit growth. So it can sell the idea to the United States, to United Kingdom, to the World Bank that it is Africa's lion, that its aspirations to be Asian tiger, the African lion, is okay. Its development scheme, which is based on violation of human rights, it's okay. That human rights will come when the country is finally a middle-income country. But unfortunately, it'll be way too late. Just in Lower Omo, 1.5 million people are being forcibly displaced. So their lands can be given away so you can have cotton and sugarcane plantations, plantations that won't feed the people of Ethiopia. This is for exports. This is for the rich in the country to get richer, the domestic investors and the foreign investors. But I don't need to tell you that. You're faced with a situation where you lose so much land that nearly 2 to 3 million Oromos will be impacted. But this is the development strategy of this government, which helps it maintain its power, political power. Economic dispossession is very closely linked to absolute control over political power. In the course of our work, we basically saw that while Ethiopia is hailed as the model for the rest of the Africa to follow, there is no democracy. We were surprised that if you try to speak to media, there is no media. Most of the independent journalists are either in exile or behind bars. There is no civil society. The proclamation has decimated the civil society that can monitor human rights. The anti-terrorism law has become the tool to stifle all dissent. It does not conform to international standards. But what was most shocking for us as an independent think tank, that God forbid, if Sudan was doing this, if Mugabe was doing this in Zimbabwe, the Western nations would stand up and say something. Instead, when there have been efforts to do something about the lack of human rights, suppression of human rights in Ethiopia, a very weak human rights bill was introduced and passed by the Senate, the White House turned it down. The White House turned down an opportunity to bring human rights in Ethiopia. Why? If you've seen the WikiLeaks cables, Meles could sit there and tell our congressional representatives and tell our president that if you talk about human rights in Ethiopia, your geostrategic interest will be impacted. Ethiopia will not be doing your dirty wars in Somalia. We will not be an ally in the war on terrorism. It is this narrow geostrategic interest have given a short vision to our elected officials who think that given South Sudan and Somalia, let's not focus on Ethiopia, not recognizing that the kind of unrest you have in the country, you can't keep putting it down. In the course of our work, we saw that the largest providers of aid to maintain this regime are United States, United Kingdom, and the World Bank. When we made enough noise, they actually sent a delegation to investigate. They came back and said, well, we hear about human rights abuses, but we could not corroborate it. So what did we do at the Oakland Institute? We released the transcripts. We released the recordings of what the communities told these people, and they chose to say they could not find any human rights abuses. You know, the ultimate tragedy is not the oppression and cruelty by bad people. The ultimate tragedy is the silence over that by good people, as Martin Luther King reminded us. So it is quite shameful when the allies of Ethiopia decide to choose quiet and keep quiet even as the news of massacres and killings and protests grow. Let me tell you about Pastor Omot. In the work that we have done over the years, we have been helped a lot by this amazing man, Pastor Omot, another Anuak man from Gambela. He is a very brave, courageous man. In fact, when the Anuak people brought a complaint to the World Bank and went to the inspection panel, saying that your financing of PBS program is linked to villagization, which is forcibly displacing us from our lands, which is destroying our livelihoods, which is putting us in jails, which is turning us into refugees on our own lands. He was a translator. He was a fixer. The World Bank put out his photograph. And soon after, a scathing report by the inspection panel came out. I will not forget that email from Omot saying, I'm getting threats. I'm getting phone calls threatening me. Almost now 10 months ago, he and 6 other colleagues were going to Kenya for a workshop on food security organized by Bread for the World. They were arrested at the airport. They were arrested and charged as terrorists, and today Pastor Omot, Ashani, and Jamal are still in jail, facing completely false charges of terrorism because they spoke out, because they were courageous enough to live within Ethiopia and speak the truth. My colleague Tanya is here. She has a flyer on Pastor Omot's case. I'm going to ask Tanya if you wouldn't mind sharing so you can learn what is happening in Oromo today. is what's happening forever in the Gambela region. It's been happening in Afar, it's been happening in Ogaden, it's been happening in Lower and South Omo. You have a very repressive government which does not know how to respect human rights. It maintains its power by destroying rights of all. You know, we are a think tank. We started our work looking at the impact of land investments. But when we saw the number of people who are being arrested, we had to look at the anti-terrorism law. You know, we're not a legal organization, but we were forced to look at it. And I hope you got a copy of the report that was put outside. We brought together a team of international lawyers from very prestigious firms from United States and from UK, which analyzed that law, and they find what has been said by many others, Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, by the UN rapporteurs, that it has become a tool to stifle dissent. It does not conform to international standards. It is so vague that anything you say and do, the fact I'm standing here, makes it right for the government to arrest me and put me away forever. So what is happening today in Oromia is happening in Gambela. It is happening in Lower and South Omo and other parts of the country. And so what is needed, as we heard today, with that video, we have to speak in one voice. You know, very often the Ethiopian government will ask me, why are you so concerned? You're from India. This is about Ethiopia. Don't meddle in our international affairs. We get a lot of threats in our offices. Things I would not, as a woman, I don't feel comfortable saying what they say they'll do to me, personally. But an injury to one is an injury to all. As long as Ethiopia has human rights abuses, Africa will never have human rights as a continent. As long as Africa does not have human rights, the rest of the world will not have human rights. As long as Indians can go into Ethiopia and be allowed by the government to treat the locals as non-people, Karaturi goes to Gambela, hires local people, and does not pay them the same wages as the Highlanders because it tells them, you're indigenous, you're a non-person. In today's world, there is no place for that language, for those attitudes, for those racism, and for the discrimination. There is no place for that. So yes, it is true, you don't have to be Oromo to speak for justice. You don't have to be Oromo to speak for justice in Oromia today and to speak on behalf of those young students. I can be an Indian and I can be an American citizen, and it is my duty and responsibility to speak out for justice in Oromia today. You don't have to be Oromo. You don't have to be Oromo to speak out for justice for Bekele Garba. You can be an Anuak, you can be a Suri, you can be a Bodhi, you can be a Mursi, but you need to say free Bekele Garba. You don't need to be an Oromo to sign that petition and say free Pastor Omot. A struggle of an Anuak man is a struggle of the Oromias. You don't have to be Oromo to sign and support and join Congressman Ellison, who is speaking out on behalf of Mr. Okello. All you have to be is a human being. All you have to be is a courageous human being who wants a world where our children have livelihoods, where the lands, forests, farms are owned and farmed by the communities who live on them. We all have to want a world where countries like Ethiopia can pursue development paradigms which do not look like that of this country where the indigenous communities were massacred. Africa can do better than the United States. Ethiopia can do better than the United States. I would also say this is a time to think, as you think today about unity, think of the Ethiopian Muslims, their leaders who face the same terrorism charges and are in jail. Those 17 leaders. Today, as you talk about unity and the future of Oromos, think about the Anuaks, think about the Suris, think about one united voice. Because when you go to the State Department, as we do, we are always told, we just don't know who to listen to. Sometimes we have Solidarity Movement for New Ethiopia coming to see us. Sometimes we have Human Rights Watch coming to see us. Sometimes we have the Oromo communities coming to see us. The message is very simple to unite around. Land belongs to the people. It cannot be grabbed without free, prior, informed consent by the government. Anti-terrorism law, get rid of it, repeal it. It can be a united demand. Political participation, democracy is not wishful thinking. Cut off aid which does not go to civil society that can monitor human rights. Appropriations bill clearly say people cannot be forcibly displaced. Is the US government monitoring what the appropriations bill say? They're very clear demands that we all can unite around, never mind where we are from. And with that, I end, I say, having worked in this country for so many years now, there is no place like Ethiopia as a beautiful land. The courage of the people is inspiring as the courage of you all as you gather here. It seems such a cliche, but when fingers unite, a fist is what gives us power. And I think the time for Ethiopia has come to do this instead of remaining fragmented. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Well, you already answered, but there is one question always bothers me about the hypocrisy of the Western world, especially the United States. Here they talk about democracy, human rights, rule of law. But what they are doing, especially in Ethiopia, empowering the minority, providing all machineries, and they are making the minority massacre our people. Here in the United States, the so-called home of democracy, human rights, but is really a home of hypocrisy. So from your experience working with them, what's the practical advice you would give us to really do the United States not support tyranny? The tyranny is killing our people by the support of the United States government. We are taxpayers. The United States government giving our money and allowing TPLF to massacre our people. So what kind of practical experience you would like to share to us? Thank you.
Segregation was legal. Apartheid was legal. Women not having a right to vote was legal. So I think we need to be a little bit careful when we talk about what's legal. Laws are laws when they work for the people. In terms of, again, the United States government or any of the, the UK government, another big benefactor of the Ethiopian government, it is not going to be emotional, ideological, pleas. It is going to be facts, and it is going to be organizing. It's going to be two simple things. One is, you have to understand why are these countries continuing to ignore and call what's happening in the country merely a deficit of democracy. That's what they've called it at best. When people have mobilized, you saw the resolution that came from the European Union. It is going to be that continued mobilization. It is going to be that continued analysis and shifting the power that if these countries don't intervene, they would have a huge problem. It is actually in the strategic security interest of the United States, for instance, to actually intervene in Ethiopia today. They are being very stupid if they do not intervene today, or you will have another South Sudan, Somalia on your hands. It's a matter of time. It is a matter of time. Hungry people, dispossessed people are angry people. Protests happen all the time in Ethiopia. This is one of the most incredible protests that's happening. And to look it away and to ignore it is not very wise of the US government. So we have to continue educating, continue to sharing information, continuing to mobilize. So I think that's going to be a very important part of our work in the coming days. And we can do that if we speak in one unified voice. As I said, and I'll keep saying it, the cause of the Oromo people is no different from the cause of the other people. When you speak out for Bekele Garba, make the US government accountable. President Obama went to Ethiopia, and before he went, Bekele Garba was released. He was released. He was invited to the United States. He was on NPR. He went around the universities, and since the protest started, he's back in prison. There is not one single statement from the United States government as to what has happened to Bekele Garba. Make him the conscience of the United States government. Make him the conscience of President Obama. Whether it requires being in Washington, D.C., whether it means being outside the offices of our congressional representatives, make these people known. If people had not mobilized for Nelson Mandela, he would have remained named a terrorist till he died. These so-called terrorists in Ethiopia today are freedom fighters. These are people fighting to bring democracy to the country. Make Eskinder Nega, make all of these bloggers, make, Okello Ochala. They're all freedom fighters. Rename that. And the first thing we have to fight for is to get rid of that anti-terrorism law. Otherwise, all governments become hindered because somebody's been called a terrorist. Get rid of the damn law. That has to be our first demand.
As Sanura said, if you all Google what's happening at the World Bank and how World Bank is investing huge in Ethiopia and where those investment is going, if you examine the Exim Bank from India, that has about, last I read was about 6 bank branches. They open bank in Ethiopia. And also the Turkey, you remember Turkish president was in Ethiopia, and they're gonna open bank too. And they are financing actually the Ethiopian government to build about 3 parliament seats. They are gonna build parliament seats in main capital city, another one in Mekelle, where they are from, and another one in Bahir Dar, where is the vast majority Oromo land, none. And this is what's happening. This is what we call a false narrative that's going on at the World Bank, IMF level. That need to be challenged. And this time we have about 10, 15 minutes. And I would like to ask questions. This is a question. We encourage you to, we're going to limit questions to 6 questions and for our guest speaker. Before we transition to our next speaker. So it's open. Initially we thought we put a flashcard in your packet so that you write down questions. But if you raise your hands and ask questions relating to presentations and relating to the speech, and I facilitate that.
I'm not able to put together what I want to say. Less because I'm not able to say it, more because I'm so much distraught, devastated, and overwhelmed, and stumbling all over the place. There is no single Oromo man and a woman who has never felt this pain that our society back home are facing. I had the privilege to conduct a piece of research exactly 10 years ago when I was in the UK about this devastating policy, land policy, and its impact in the very place where this genocide has happened in Ambo. And I know the extent of the price I paid for challenging the very essence of the development strategy that this tyrant government has put in place. It has been challenged from within, internationally, and from every corner of the world. Because it is a development strategy that enabled the few to prosper and the many to despair. No human being would tolerate such an agony. I have seen it, I lived it, and I know what it means. I have been there. So I'm always wondering why the political pundits, those people who are running for political office in this country who are claiming or telling us that they are foreign policy experts, in their political rallies, that they turned their blind eyes and deaf ears to what is happening in this particular corner of the world. And I always wonder why the blood of the Oromo young men and women, the Oromos from all walks of life, is not counting. And I always questioning, and this question resonates to all the Oromo brothers and sisters. I have seen people dying. I have been asked to witness on students and college students where I teach that they are members of this and that political group. They are people who have been named and framed for the act that they have never done. And the scope and the magnitude of the disaster in that country is beyond expression. Terrorism is so much romanticized. Terrorism is a catchword in the whole world. And I am wondering how the terrorism impacts are happening and where the root causes are lying. Isn't it tyranny? So what I'm saying is, you know, the reason why they are turning their blind eye is unclear to me. I want to know that. And because the genocide that's happening in that country is consistent with the genocide definition of the United Nations declaration that has been done in 1948, Article ABC. It's consistent with that. So where can you help us take this situation so that we can get our voices heard and find an end to the agony?
Thank you.
I had a lot to say.
Thank you so much. Is there a similar question?
When they bring TPLF, the Tigray People Liberation Front, they have a list TPLF as a terrorist organization in their database. They brought to power just because of the Cold War. And this time, they are saying they are our terrorist ally, but indirectly they are sponsoring state terrorism. How we can, when the country verbally says we champion democracy and human rights, but the practicality is the opposite, how we can challenge it?
Thank you for gracing us with your presence and for caring so deeply about, justice and humanity. I guess I wanted to reiterate something in a question form. We all know that Obama went in 2014 in the backdrop of the first student protest. And so with that, diplomatic embarrassment and the geopolitical interest they have in the region, we can say that they see now that was a mistake. So is the current silence to save the embarrassment of that dilemma, or really to keep the geopolitical interest, which is already undermined, intact? Which one is it, or is it both? And if it is, how to challenge that? Thank you.
There's a very small window of opportunity that we all have if we want to see change in Ethiopia. There is, on one hand, embarrassment. At the same time, things are shifting in South Sudan. As you see the vice president and the president talking, there's a narrow opportunity, and we have a narrow opportunity as the elections happen and a new president will come into this country. If we miss this opportunity, it's going to take another decade at least of work. Or something horrible might happen, which we don't want to happen. It's already happening as we speak. So given that, this is the moment to keep pushing upon and emphasizing. This is not the time. This is to bring all the evidence as we can. This is a time to get busloads of people that spill over. I mean, there's so much to learn from the histories of struggles around the world, whether it was South Africa, whether it was anywhere you think about Burma, Myanmar. This is the time to mobilize. This is the time to speak out. This is the time to join forces. This is the time to link up with each other. Never mind an Indian, a French, an American, Anuak, Ethiopian Muslim. This is the time to speak in one voice that the US administration, President Obama, who we all loved and brought him and thought a little bit as a son of Africa, has failed Africa. Let it be on his conscience that before he goes, perhaps he can do something. And then support the congressional representatives. I mean, we have been working with some of them. I mean, you are so fortunate to have Congressman Ellison right here, for instance. We've had the opportunity to work with his office. Support the people who will support you. Those who ignore you, let them know they will not have your support. Make it loud and clear. So this is a vital year given the US elections. Put Ethiopia on the foreign policy when the debates are happening. I mean, are they even talking about it? We can't hold them responsible if we haven't mobilized to put it on the agenda. The finger is pointing towards us, each one of us. The question I hope we'll be asking as we leave is, what will I do to bring about a different Ethiopia? What will I do today to link up with someone else so we can speak out and speak in a louder voice together? Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks again for inviting us here today. The Senator is in D.C., so unfortunately she couldn't be here today, but this is an issue that is really important to her, and as many of you know, earlier this month, the Senator and Senator Franken signed on to letters to Secretary Kerry and the State Department on this exact issue, calling for more changes and more actions to be done on behalf of the State Department to address this issue. But she's not here today, but she did have this letter that she would like for me to read on her behalf. Here we go. Dear friends, thank you for the invitation to join you for today's collaborative public forum on the promotion and protection of human rights in Oromia. Although my schedule prevents me from being with you in person, I would like to thank the Oromo community of Minnesota for their tireless efforts to shed light on the violence occurring in Oromia, while also being a resource for the local Oromo community. For 31 years, the Oromo community of Minnesota has engaged and enriched the lives of the Oromo immigrants, whether it is through expanding access to health care or maintaining a vibrant and cohesive community. This organization has played an important role. In the past year, the efforts of this group have highlighted the unnecessary violence against farmers and student protesters in Oromia. The actions by the Ethiopian government to silence peaceful protesters exercising their freedom of expression will not stand. No citizen should have to endure arbitrary arrest or death when questioning the actions of its leaders. I will continue to push for actions from the State Department to ensure that this escalating violence against civilians cease and that their concerns are heard. Again, thank you for your invitation. I am proud to serve you in the United States Senate and look forward to working with you to tackle this conflict and ensure basic human rights are being upheld in this region. Sincerely, Amy Klobuchar, United States Senate. Thank you so much.
I just want to, using opportunities, one thing, I try to be good at all the time. Mr. Garrison, we have, a request with the Senator office that the State Director knows, and we have submitted our request in the month of January to have in-person meetings, and that response is still in the waiting mode. I just want to leave that with you to push, whatever is in your power, so that we address the concerns of 40,000 Oromos in the Twin Cities, and for our senator to make that time available for us. So I just want you to take that home, and we have also kind of talking of give to take with you to the senator. Really make this is a serious business, and take it serious. So this is a T-shirt. Summer is coming. It says Oromia Birthplace of Coffee. So if you deliver that and make sure that we get a response on that. Thank you so much. And thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I would like to invite Amy Berquist from the Advocate for Human Rights Minnesota. So she's with us, as always she does. So Amy, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Awul, for the introduction. And I want to thank the Oromo community of Minnesota for organizing this event. I know it takes a lot of time and energy and effort on the part of many people to put together an event like this. So I thank you for all of your efforts, and I want to thank the other sponsors and supporters for putting this event together. My name is Amy Berquist, and I am a staff attorney at the Advocates for Human Rights. We are a Minneapolis-based nonprofit, and we've been around for about 33 years. And I would guess that for a lot of those 33 years, we have been working closely with the Oromo people in one way or another. Just by way of background, what I'm going to talk about today, and I hope this will be a good follow-up to the information you've already received and talked about, is what can all of you do about human rights in Oromia? You, the Oromo people and allies and friends, what can you do about the situation of human rights there? But before I get into that, just an introduction for those of you who don't know about the Advocates for Human Rights. We, as I said, we're a Minneapolis-based nonprofit, and we work to implement international human rights standards in order to promote civil society and reinforce the rule of law. And we believe very strongly that everyone can be an advocate for human rights. rights. You don't need to be an expert. You don't need to be a specialist. Every one of you is an advocate for human rights, and you as individuals and as groups can take action that will help improve human rights here in the United States, in Oromia, and around the world. There are three main topics I want to talk about today. One, I want to talk about what you can do with respect to fact-finding. Fact-finding is very important for human rights. You have to know what is actually going on, and the diaspora can play a huge role in fact-finding. Second, I'll talk about accountability. I know a lot of people, especially in the diaspora, are really concerned about how people can be held accountable for the human rights violations that are happening in Oromia and in the rest of Ethiopia. And finally, I'll talk about advocacy and some strategies the diaspora might choose to use to engage in advocacy to try to address these human rights violations. So first I'll talk briefly about fact-finding, and if you have the handout that was passed around, it gives specific resources that you can look at. I'm hoping also was passed around this bookmark. This bookmark contains the URL for a 400-plus page toolkit that the Advocates for Human Rights published in 2014 for people like you. It's called Paving Pathways for Justice and Accountability, Human Rights Tools for Diaspora Communities. And in this toolkit, chapter by chapter, it goes through all sorts of things that you can do, and the handout tells you which chapter or even which pages you can go to for more information. But it's available for free download on the internet, and if you take this bookmark, it has the URL for you. The URL is also on the handout. But we created this handout for folks like you, and we hope you will use it. And if you have questions about it, you want more information, you can contact us, and we will provide you with whatever support we can. Speaking of whatever support we can, I also want to introduce to you one of our volunteers. The Advocates is a volunteer-based organization, and many of our volunteers are attorneys. And we have with us today Jim O'Neill, who is a retired attorney, was an attorney in private practice. And he's worked with the Advocates for a long time. He's now on our board of directors, and he is a volunteer. He works on Oromo-related issues as well. So you should all know one of the volunteers behind the work that we're able to do at the Advocates. One of the projects that we did with the Oromo diaspora here in Minnesota was a fact-finding project, and you see on the screen the results of that. That was a report we published in 2009. It was a report I worked on when I was a law student through human rights in Ethiopia through the eyes of the Oromo diaspora. This was a fact-finding project we did doing interviews with Oromos here in Minnesota about human rights conditions in Ethiopia. And that's one way you can engage in fact-finding is through doing interviews. It can be hard to do interviews with people who are in Ethiopia because of communications difficulties and government monitoring and fear, but we were able to do interviews here in Minnesota to gather information, and we've been able to use this report in asylum applications, in advocacy at the United Nations, and in all sorts of other ways. And it's not just we who are using it at the Advocates, we have other human rights organizations as well that are able to use that report to tell people what's actually going on the ground. So you don't need to wait for Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch to do a report. It's great when they do those reports. You don't need to wait for that. You can do your own fact-finding, gather your own information, do your own documentation, and write your own reports. And that's something that you have great assets to do that because you understand the language and you have great connections to the people on the ground, the people who are witnessing the human rights violations and experiencing the human rights violations. There are additional tools and remote monitoring tools that we talk about in greater detail in our Paving Pathways Toolkit. I won't talk about those now, but it gives you some ideas about other creative ways that you can remotely gather information, gather facts about human rights violations. And I'll say, on social media, we see a lot of evidence of human rights violations, a lot of bloody pictures of victims who have been killed or injured or people protesting. That's not fact-finding. That can be really valuable to share that information to show people what's actually happening. But fact-finding is a systematic gathering and verification of information and analysis of information with a view to what human rights standards are being upheld or are being violated. So while we see these pictures and these pictures make us really angry and really sad about what's going on, fact-finding is something more. It's something bigger than that, and it takes a collective. It would take a group of people to engage in that kind of fact-finding. But it's also very important as we're eager to get little bits of information that trickle out from journalists, from Human Rights Watch, from other organizations. You all have the power in your hands to engage in fact-finding also. One thing I want to emphasize, and that's the bottom part here, is safety and security of victims, informants, and human rights defenders. You'll find information about this in Chapter 11 of the toolkit, and it makes me particularly concerned when I see so many pictures of victims on the internet circulating freely on Facebook and on Twitter. We need to be really careful about the safety and security of victims, and I encourage you to read Chapter 11, specifically the portions that talk about safety and security. We also need to be very cautious about the safety and security of the people who are sending information from Oromia to the United States, because we know that the government controls the means of telecommunication, and they are engaging in surveillance, not only of people in Ethiopia, but also they're doing surveillance in the diaspora. They've installed spyware on computers of people in the diaspora. So it's really important to be aware of safety and security and to take measures so that people won't be endangered, especially if you're doing fact-finding or advocacy. You need to be really careful so that there won't be further repercussions. The next thing I want to talk about is accountability, and this will be probably the most frustrating part of my talk because it's really hard right now to think of good, effective ways to hold people accountable. But I'll go through a few different things to talk about, just the things that we hear from the diaspora that they are concerned about in terms of accountability. So first, let's talk about international tribunals. I hear a lot from the Oromo diaspora, we need to take these perpetrators to the International Criminal Court. And that's not really a viable option right now. There are ad hoc tribunals that have been set up for various countries and situations where there have been gross human rights violations for Yugoslavia, Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Lebanon, and Cambodia. But there's not really a viable, at least in the short term, there's not really a viable opportunity to set up a tribunal for Ethiopia. It's something to think about down the road, but there's no existing tribunal. So that leaves the International Criminal Court. And for Ethiopia to be subject to the International Criminal Court, Ethiopia would need to ratify the Rome Statute. It would need to ratify this treaty that recognizes the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. And Ethiopia hasn't done that. The United States government hasn't done that either. The United States has withdrawn from the International Criminal Court. And so you can't really use it. The only option to use it against non-member states is to have a UN Security Council referral. And you know who has veto power in the UN Security Council, and so Ethiopia will call on its allies in the Security Council to get them not to approve a referral. So it's really hard to think of the International Criminal Court as a viable alternative for accountability in Ethiopia right now. But that's not to say there's nothing that can be done. Immigration fraud. Here in the United States, we can use immigration laws to hold perpetrators of human rights violations in Oromia accountable. The Immigration and Customs Enforcement Authority is very eager to know if there are perpetrators of human rights abuses here in the United States. And members of the Ethiopian diaspora have been successful in reporting. There was a guy in Colorado who said, who saw at a coffee shop, this guy was my torturer during the Derg. He recognized him, he knew exactly who it was, and he reported it to ICE. And ICE handed over to federal authorities, and the guy was prosecuted and convicted in 2013, and in 2014 he was sentenced to 22 years in jail. And because he had been granted citizenship, he's going to be stripped of his citizenship because he lied on his immigration forms. And after he finishes his 22-year jail term, he'll be deported. He'll be stripped of his citizenship and sent home. So that's a way to hold individuals accountable if they happen to be in the United States, if they happen to have lied on their immigration forms. And the department is very eager to hear from people. They want to know if there are war criminals, if there are perpetrators of human rights violations who are here in the United States. They want to know about it. So that's something that you as a diaspora can do. If you know that there are perpetrators in your midst, you can organize yourselves and be in active communication. Another opportunity, and this is one that doesn't exist yet, but it is a possibility, and it has happened for perpetrators of human rights violations from countries like India and Russia, is to push for laws that would impose travel sanctions. So in some circumstances, people have been prohibited from getting a visa to enter the United States in the first place. So if you're a wealthy Ethiopian and you want to travel to the United States because it's a nice place to go, there could be legislation passed so that certain Ethiopians would not be allowed to come to the United States because they're associated with human rights violations. Similarly, The EU has imposed asset restrictions so that their assets are frozen if they keep assets overseas. So that's another thing that can be done for individuals to make their life a little more miserable for the human rights violations that they have perpetrated. Additional means of accountability, and this has to do with US law specifically, is to file lawsuits. Now, these lawsuits are really complicated, take a long time, but they can be viable ways to hold perpetrators of human rights violations accountable. The two main laws that are relevant here are the Alien Tort Statute and the Torture Victim Protection Act. And these are ways that people who are victims of human rights violations can sue their abusers to have them held accountable in US courts. Now, it's possible you can also get a judgment and get money damages, but for a lot of people who pursue these lawsuits, they know they're not going to get any money because the money isn't to be had, but they want a verdict from a court saying that this person did in fact commit these human rights violations, and that can be really powerful. So these are means that are available to the diaspora to try to hold human rights violators accountable. There are a lot of challenges with using these tools. They're used most successfully when the defendant, the person being sued, has some ties to the United States. So if the defendant is a US citizen, for example, that makes it a lot easier to use these tools to sue the defendant. Or if the defendant comes to the United States a lot, that's another way it makes it a lot easier to bring these kinds of lawsuits. Again, this is one approach for accountability. It's complicated, but there are nonprofits in the United States that specialize in using these laws. The Center for Justice and Accountability in San Francisco is well known for its great work in bringing these kinds of lawsuits. So if that's of interest, then you can work with the CJA to see if they can bring a case, and I'm sure they'd be really interested to hear from you. Now we'll switch to a couple of accountability mechanisms that might be viable in Ethiopia itself. The first is what we call an NHRI, National Human Rights Institution. A lot of countries have NHRIs, and they are supposed to be independent bodies that help monitor human rights in the country and help in some cases, have complaint mechanisms. Ethiopia does have an NHRI. It's not particularly strong. It's not A-rated. It's B-rated, meaning it's not fully independent, and that's called the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. You see the contact information here. But I would say that even though it's not a strong body, it doesn't have a lot of credibility, they are on occasion allowed to do prison visits. And so they can go in and see what the situation is with prisoners, and they do, to some extent, push back a little bit on the Ethiopian government. So that might be at least one avenue. I wouldn't say, this is your salvation, but one avenue would be to work with the commission to engage in more prison visits to see whether prisoners are being treated consistently with human rights standards, and because your average person isn't going to be able to get into those prisons to do that kind of prison visit, and they may actually be able to go into the prisons. So that's something to consider. And down the road, not today, not next year, but down the road there will be, I believe, in Ethiopia, the opportunity for truth and reconciliation. And I think when that happens, the diaspora will be involved, just as it was the case with Liberia, and the Advocates for Human Rights and Jim O'Neill were very involved when Liberia finally established a Truth and Reconciliation Commission and was the first TRC to have a formal, active role for the diaspora in finding out the truth and achieving or working toward reconciliation in Liberia. And that, I believe, can also happen when Ethiopia goes through a Truth and Reconciliation process. Again, it's not going to happen in the next year or two, but it will happen down the road, I believe. Next, let's talk about advocacy. What are the opportunities for the diaspora and allies of the diaspora to engage in advocacy? In Chapter 7 of our toolkit, you'll see a lot of the traditional kinds of advocacy that we've already been talking about, like trying to influence the president, trying to influence your lawmakers here in the United States. So I'm not going to go into detail about that, but know also that there are forms of advocacy targeting businesses. So when we talk about business investment and land, international land purchases, and the international agribusiness in Ethiopia, there are ways that individuals and groups can mobilize to try to influence those businesses about what their business practices are and that their businesses should respect human rights. So you can look further in the toolkit for some ideas there about what might be done in that regard. Then we'll talk a little bit about opportunities for advocacy with the United Nations, and finally, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. One thing I did want to highlight, though, in terms of advocacy is it's important to have a goal. And think of this as a process you can read more about in the toolkit, but what is your goal that you want to achieve? And you might say, well, freedom for Oromia or something like that, but try to be as concrete and specific as possible. Like, what concretely do you want to achieve in the next year or in the next 2 years or in the next 3 months? What's your goal? And then once you have your goal in mind, think about who your target is. Who has the power to make that goal happen? Who has the direct control over what it is that you want to change? And don't say the Ethiopian government, specifically who or what entity, what ministry in the Ethiopian government or whoever it is. Think specifically about what your target is. Once you have a target in mind, think about what obstacles are preventing that target from doing what you want it to do. It might be that that target hates Oromos. It might be that target has pressure from all sorts of other sources not to do what you want them to do. It might be that the target is just completely opposed to it, or it might be that there are other barriers, other obstacles for that entity, that group, or that individual from doing what you want them to do. And then think about the influencers. Who has influence over your target? Is it an individual? Are there countries that have influence? Are there businesses that have influence? And how can you incorporate those influencers into your strategy? Then think about coalitions. We've already heard about this from earlier speakers. Human rights in Oromia are not identical to, but have a lot of overlap with human rights for the Anuak, with human rights in the Gambela, with human rights in the Ogaden. And so there may be ways to ally with other groups and individuals to form coalitions that can work toward a common goal. So that's really important to think about, is how can you work with allies, work in coalition towards some common goals. Then think about framing and messaging. How are you going to present this message to your target audience in a way that will be persuasive? What language are you going to use, and how are you going to frame the problem and the solution? So that's something that we could talk for hours about, but it's really important to think about how you're going to frame your issue and what messages you're going to use. Then, of course, you go through mobilization and action. You implement your plan, and then you may need to reform your goal, revisit your goal. Are you working toward your goal? Are you getting close to achieving it? Do you need to revise your goal based on what you've learned so far? So it's a cyclical process that should be ongoing, but it's really important to think strategically about what your goals are and how you can go about achieving your goals. So now we'll jump into talking about advocacy at the United Nations. One thing that I think is quite viable for the human rights conditions in Oromia right now is to appeal to what we call the UN special procedures, or the special procedures mandate holders. And these are just some of the special procedures at the UN, and you'll find in the toolkit a complete list of all the special procedures mandate holders. And these, I thought, were the most relevant, probably, to the situation in Oromia. And I should say also, it's kind of deceptive. I included the Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues, and people may say, well, the Oromo are the largest ethnic group in Ethiopia. They're not a minority. But the way human rights standards define minorities, the Oromo are a minority because they are oppressed, they have faced human rights violations, they're disenfranchised. And so when human rights bodies use the word minority, that includes the Oromo people. That includes the Oromo people. It doesn't mean it's not by percentage. So it's a similar situation, too, under apartheid in South Africa, where black South Africans were not a numerical minority. They're in the majority, but they were, by human rights standards, they were treated as minorities, and so they're considered to be minorities. So don't let that term throw you off. But these UN special procedures mandate holders can be a great vehicle for doing advocacy about what's going on in Oromia. And there could be an opportunity for diaspora individuals or groups of individuals to do advocacy with these mandate holders. And I'll explain a little bit about what that is that you can do. The special procedures mandate holders do two main things. One, they do country visits. And they go visit on the ground, they go to the country, they talk to people, and then they make findings. It's not the most viable opportunity for Ethiopia because the government has to allow them to come in. And the Ethiopian government has not typically granted requests from these mandate holders to go to Ethiopia and look around. But the other opportunity that is available and has been used, and I think should be used more, is to do communications. A communication to a special procedure mandate holder is kind of like a complaint. You're sending a complaint to the mandate holder to say, here's this individual or this group of individuals and their human rights were violated, their human rights relating to your particular mandate, your particular topic were violated, and we'd like you to intervene. So you fill out a very simple questionnaire, and those questionnaires are available online. It's just tell them what the facts are, tell them some of the details, tell them what happened when, the names of the victims, and so on. And then the special procedure mandate holder staff will assess that complaint. They might ask for some additional information. And then if they think it's a legitimate claim for a violation of the human rights within their mandate, they'll send a summary of that information to the government of Ethiopia in this case, and they'll request a response. And then the government of Ethiopia will look into the situation, and then they'll give a formal response to the special procedure mandate holder saying, this is the way we see it. And then the person who initiated the complaint can get a rebuttal, can get a chance to say what their reaction is. Now, it's not as though the special procedures mandate holders can't go in with the police force or anything, but they can make findings, and the information about those complaints is made public 3 times a year at the Human Rights Council. So I'll give you just one example of one that related to some people you may know. This is one I pulled off of the records from 2015. This is a complaint submitted against the government of Ethiopia to the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression, the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Peaceful Assembly and of Association, the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Health, and the Special Rapporteur on the Independence of Judges and Lawyers. And here you can see that this is the summary that is published for all the world to see of what happened with Mr. Obana Lelisa and Mr. Bekele Gerba, and details what all of the allegations were that they submitted in that questionnaire. And then if you click on that link, you get to the Ethiopian government's response. And the Ethiopian government went through the allegations, and of course they are going to say that it was a fair trial and so on and so forth, and that they were given access to doctors and so on. But it's a way for the government of Ethiopia to know that the international human rights community is paying attention. It's a way to highlight cases if you're concerned about individuals being kept incommunicado, if you're concerned about people who are being tortured. This is a way to have the UN tell the Ethiopian government, we're watching you, we're paying attention to what's going on, and we want you to explain to us what it is that we're hearing and what your response is. In some cases, especially the first one, the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, they actually issue opinions. So they don't just let the government give its response. They will make findings, they will issue opinions saying this is what our conclusions are about whether human rights have been violated. So that's something that you all could do, and you can think creatively about this. If you know that there's been a protest and there was a peaceful protest and people were shot at and killed or injured, you can communicate with the family members, friends of the people who were injured or killed, and you can say, do you want to submit a complaint to the UN? And it's really important for this procedure, you have to have the consent of the victim, or if the victim is dead, or if the victim is being held incommunicado or can't be reached, then you need to have the consent of the family members of the victims. But if they consent to it, then you could have a team of people that fills out that questionnaire, that talks to them to get that information, fills out the questionnaire, and then you just submit it online. It's not rocket science, you don't have to be an attorney to do it, but you could have a team that's ready to go. Whenever these human rights violations happen, whenever there's a particular act of students being expelled from school, for example, there's a special rapporteur on the right to education. So on behalf of a group of students that was expelled for peaceful protesting, you could have a team filling out one of the questionnaires to submit that so that the UN can be asking, why were these students expelled from school? Why aren't they being allowed to pursue their studies? What's going on here? And then the government of Ethiopia will have to give a response. So that's another way to highlight what these human rights violations are. Next, we'll talk about the UN Human Rights Council. It has a communications procedure that's for really big human rights violations. The Human Rights Council is a political entity, it's a political body at the UN, but it also is very powerful. And the government of Ethiopia feels very strongly about the Human Rights Council. Ethiopia is a member of it, one of the 47 governments on the Human Rights Council right now. It values its reputation on the Human Rights Council. And so this may be another way to highlight things that can be done. And again, all this information is in the toolkit. So if you have the URL, you can get this information in the toolkit. I'm not sharing any secrets there. It's all available for you. But the communications with the UN Human Rights Council, you have to have direct knowledge of the human rights violations, and it's supposed to be for consistent patterns of gross human rights violations, which I think a lot of what we see happening in Oromia fits that description quite well. You also have to exhaust your local remedies. In other words, you have to go through the Ethiopian court system unless there's no possibility to do so, and you'd have to explain why there's no possibility to go through the Ethiopian court system. And I think within the diaspora, you probably have a lot of experts who can speak to whether judges are fair and impartial in Oromia, in Ethiopia, and why that's not a viable alternative. And then it goes to the Working Group on Communications. It's a lengthy process, and it's also a confidential process. But this is another option for pursuing some advocacy with the UN Human Rights Council as well. The next thing I want to talk about is the UN has an inquiry procedure, and this is specifically with the Committee Against Torture. And Ethiopia, this is an inquiry procedure that the government has to agree to affirmatively. So when Ethiopia ratified the Convention Against Torture, it agreed that it would allow this inquiry procedure. And it is, the Committee Against Torture will consider conducting an inquiry if there's reliable information that appears to contain well-founded indications that torture is being systematically practiced. So it has to be systematic practice of torture in a country. So if you think about what we know about what's happening in various prisons in Ethiopia, there probably is a good case to be made for systematic practice of torture. And that information can be submitted to the Committee Against Torture to request an inquiry, and then the Committee Against Torture can conduct a confidential inquiry, and it as part of the procedures, it's supposed to seek the cooperation of the government facing the accusations. So the Committee Against Torture would go to the Ethiopian government and say, we have these accusations of systematic use of torture, we would like your cooperation. And the Ethiopian government can say yes or no, but the committee can still proceed with the inquiry even if the Ethiopian government says no. So that's another, and these aren't mutually exclusive. You can choose a lot of these different tools for advocacy, but this is one to consider because Ethiopia has agreed to this inquiry procedure. Also, there are advocacy opportunities with the periodic reviews that happen at the United Nations. I've listed all of the treaty body committees that Ethiopia is a party to. Coming up this year, the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities will be reviewing Ethiopia's human rights record. So we are getting ready to submit a report to that committee. If you have information about people with disabilities in Ethiopia and human rights violations against them, I'm all ears. We have a reporting deadline coming up in a couple of weeks and then another deadline in July. So we can gather that information and get it to them. As some of you may know, we also worked with the Oromo diaspora to go and present to the Committee on the Rights of the Child. And they did their review of Ethiopia last year. These are supposed to be periodic reviews, and Ethiopia is way behind in its reporting obligations on some of those. For instance, the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which includes ethnic discrimination, they haven't reported for quite a long time. They're way overdue. When that comes around, of course, that's another great opportunity to get that committee involved, because what happens then is the government of Ethiopia sends a delegation to meet with the committee, and the committee asks tough questions. The Committee on the Rights of the Child asked really tough questions, specifically about the student protesters. And that's another way to make the Ethiopian government more and more uncomfortable about what's going on and to raise the visibility about these human rights violations. There's also the Universal Periodic Review, which happens every 4.5 years. It happened in 2014, so we'll be coming around in 2018, 2019 for the next review, and that's at the Human Rights Council, because that's another big opportunity to raise visibility about human rights violations at the Human Rights Council. I'll also say that the Human Rights Council, there are some really good short-term opportunities to engage in some advocacy with the Human Rights Council. The Human Rights Council meets 3 times a year. Its next meeting starts on Monday for 4 weeks, the March session of the Human Rights Council. And there's a group of NGOs that is urging all delegates to the Human Rights Council, all countries around the world, to specifically make interventions, to make speeches at the Human Rights Council denouncing the human rights violations that are happening there. So all of you, as people who live in the United States, you can lobby the United States mission to the UN in Geneva to encourage them to make statements condemning the violence in Oromia, to condemn what the Ethiopian government is doing. But of course, the Oromo diaspora is worldwide. So Oromos in Sweden, in Norway, in Switzerland, in Australia, in New Zealand, all around the world, they can lobby their government's office in Geneva to the UN and encourage them to take the floor at the Human Rights Council session starting next week to condemn the violence. And that, because Ethiopia is on the Human Rights Council, it's very sensitive to its reputation, that can also be a way to put pressure on the Ethiopian government to say the whole world is watching, we know what you're doing and we don't like it and we're not going to stand for it. Finally, I'll talk briefly about the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. It's an African mechanism. It's not the most rigorous. It doesn't have, it's not as widely respected, but it can be very helpful. And specifically, I want to talk about the communications mechanism. It has a communications mechanism which, like some of the other ones I've mentioned, it's kind of like filing a lawsuit, but not in a court. It's bringing a petition to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights to show that there have been violations of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. And you need to put together affidavits, you need to gather evidence, and you need to have specific victims, and you need to have the permission of the victims to bring the case on their behalf with the African Commission. So victim consent is very important, and you're supposed to you can't rely exclusively on secondhand information. There has to be some reliance on firsthand information. Also, the African Commission requires exhaustion of domestic remedies unless, as we've talked about before, it's just not possible because the courts are not free and fair. And you have to submit in a timely way. Typically, it's within 6 months of the human rights violation, so the clock can be ticking. And the Advocates for Human Rights has some volunteer attorneys who have some experience using this mechanism with the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. So if there are people who are interested in participating, if you have family members who are direct victims of some of these human rights violations happening in Oromia, happening right now, happening since November, then you can talk to me or Jim and see if your family member wants to be named as a victim, wants to bring a case to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. That might be something that the advocates could collaborate with you on. Finally, I'll also mention the African Commission on Human and People's Rights also has special mechanisms like the special procedures at the UN. And they don't have a formal complaint procedure, but they do respond in some cases when there are grave human rights violations with press releases, asking the government of Ethiopia, for example, to do certain things, to take certain measures, and they may conduct country visits. And the Ethiopian government might be more willing to allow a country visit from the African Commission than it would from the UN. So that might be another alternative strategy for advocacy. So that's sort of a whirlwind tour of our 400-page toolkit and what you can read about there. But I hope that gives you some ideas about ways that all of you can collaborate and things you can do to try to press for improving human rights, justice, and accountability in Oromia.
Ganama kana adde Anutan from Auckland Institute dhuftee waa'ee saaminsa jechii keessattuu naannawa Gaambeellaa irraa riisarchii isaan godhan impaaktii inni qabu hedduudha nuuf himtee turte. Mesajni yookiin taan ergaan guddoon isiin nuuf himte maali? Namni ishuu adda addaa irratti hojjechuudhaaf yoo gurmaa'ee sagalee takkaan dubbate waan barbaadullee argachuu danda'a kan jedhu. San bira dabartee ammaas Oromoon akka Oromootti ummata biyyeefiitiif falmachaa jirti. Haa ta'u immoo nuti akka hangafa biyya Itoophiyaa keessa jirrutti sabaa sablammii xixiqqaa hundaa ofitti qabnee dhiitama dhala namaa biyya san keessa jiruuf irratti hojjechuun dirqama keenya because nuti heddummina keenyaan by the virtue of our geography biyya san keessatti nuti akka hangafaatti dura deemnee waan san godhuu qabnaadha. Kun ammaas waahila horachuudha. Warri human rights irratti hojjetu hedduun isaanii warri Oromoon ta'in jechuudha. Waan qabatamaa lafa jiru qorannoo irra godhuudhaanii dhiyeessanii isaan nuuf waahile maal jennaan waan nurraa dhagayan qofaa miti ambitinuu waan jettu mootummaaleen garagaraa dhagaya waan san ta'eef isaanis firoonfachaa nutis sagantaa fi tarsimoo adda addaa baafachuudhaan uummata keenyaaf sagalee ta'uudha. Kun adde Amy Berquist from Advocate for Human Rights isin yeroo hedduu waldaa hawaasa Oromooti hojjaa ta'u hawaasa Oromoo kaas jiru yeroo garagaraa dhuftee haasawaa gooti. Isinis waa'ila teenya jabduudha. Maaliif bara 2009 keessa I think human rights abuses through the eyes of Oromo in Ethiopia kajuu suni it was the second fact-finding report that was conducted by human rights advocate. Sandura was on Liberian community and followed by the Oromo community here. Isan reporting Isan Basan sun not only gives legitimacy about what we're saying, it also helps our immigrants who are here, victims of tortures and namni oga golgaltummaa biyya kanatti gaafatu karaa heeraatiin isaan kun hedduun gargaarani. Sambira dabree ammaas isiin some tools waan itti fayyadamuu dandeenyu keessattuu waa'ee advocacy irratti nuun geessee turte. She also gave us a pamphlet which has a URL website irratti deemanii waan silaa nu gargaaru achitti hedduudha ibsitee turte. Gaafii fi deebisaa keessattis waan adda addaa kan nu himte asirraa wanni gaafatame Oromoo as jirtuuf warra uummata keenyaaf sagalee ta'uu barbaaduuf leenjiin isin gootan ni jira jaamee as keessaa gaafatamee ture. Akka leexaa miti akka gareetti yoo dhuftanii request gootan nuti isin gargaaruudhaaf isin leenjisuudhaaf uummata keessaniif akka sagalee taatan isin bira dhaabbachuudhaaf qophiidha jette. Waan sanarratti dhimma akkaataatti gargaaramnuu fi waan garagaraa irratti booda haasawa bal'aa nuti gootu keessan ni haasoyna. Yoo NPR ready ta'ee jiraate taate adde Amaanii Badhaasootii yaama. Osoo isin gadi hin dhufne dura boordiin waldaa hawaasa Oromoo kan baranaa bara 2016 kan filame Noovembar keessa eegas booda sossoo'insi biyya keessaa kunis kan ta'e wanni nuti irratti hojjechaa jirrus haalattiin boordii haalattiin waldaa hawaasa Oromoo ittiin gaggeessinu haala bulmaata isaa jechuudha. Kun ammaas uummata biyya teenyaatiif sagalee ta'uudha. Amma qophii akkanaa tanaa'uu qindeessuun yeroo fudhata. Obbo Tashiteen faan awwal faanii fi boordiin hundinuu halkanii guyyaa irratti hojjechaa jiranii. Kun hundinuu boordiin waa gootee fi miti kan impaaktii qabnu. Yoo hawaasni heddumminaan jabinaan irratti qooda fudhate wanni Tashitee ilaalchistu hundinuu ni ilaalchisti jaanii namni yoo qooda fudhate qofa. Sanuma wal qabatee akkuma yaadattanitti hiriirri biyya kana keessa gaggeeffamee ture. Hiriira sanis qopheesse koree takkaatu uumamee hawaasni filatee isaan san boodallee fundraisers godhanii uummata biyya akkaataatti gargaaru irratti amma koreen sunii fi deemaaniinis keessa jirti. Akkaataa Oromoon biyya kanatti ittiin gurmooytu Oromoo kaakas waan jedhamu sanarratti hojjetamaa jira. Sani bal'inaan deemaaneetu dubbataa isittiin dabarsa. Isin akkuma beekamutti shamarree teenya keessaa warra iddoo adda addaa deemanii uummata keenyaaf sagalee ta'anii. Isiif Amy Berquist, I think it was last year, Geneva deemanii waa'ee mirga dhala namaa irratti keessattuu waa'ee daa'imman irratti rarraa. Achi dhaqanii haasawanii turanii. She is a big advocate for Oromo. Isiilleen galatoomuu qabdi waan godhaa jirtuuf. Kana boodaas waan jabaadha uummata Oromootiif gooti jeetiin amana. Without further ado, I will call on Amaanii Badhaasoo to come and speak on Oromo American Caucus and political participation here. Welcome.
Haye Galatoma, for the purpose of just making this go fast, I'm just going to speak in English. I'm honored to be here. Actually did not prepare that much because I just wanted to speak briefly for about 3 to 5 minutes. But before I proceed, I think it's appropriate to share a moment in silence for the over 440 people that have been massacred for peaceful protest in Oromia. So I want you guys to briefly, for 1 minute, to just say your condolences to these people. Okay, thank you very much, and may their victory come sooner than tomorrow. This year, we realized that we, as a community, have to be empowered, and as much as we preach for human rights and do a lot of advocacy, we have to build political power. That's just how things get done, whether it's domestically or internationally. And being that we have over 40,000 Oromos within this state, this is the political ground for advocacy and lobbying on behalf of the people back home in Oromia. So essentially, we got together. It was a part of a committee actually responding to the Oromo protests to figure out what can we do in order to help the people back home. And that's very important because we have to understand our role as a diaspora member. There's only so much that we can do. So we came up with the Oromo Caucus as a platform to begin our advocacy. And essentially what a caucus is. So a caucus is a meeting of supporters and members of any political party within the states. The Oromo community is in dire need of utilizing resources and building political power in Minnesota. By building a caucus, we're proclaiming that we are present, and I think we have been absent in the representative democracy here. As much as our numbers are big, we haven't been active, and we're not recognized within the states in comparison to other East Africans. So what is our caucus meant to do? We have listed about 8 things that we aim to do. One of them is endorse and screen candidates for local, state, and federal office. Second is educate the public on the Oromo community in Minnesota and abroad. Thirdly, train and equip Oromo Americans to run for office and engage in the political process. Fourth, advocate for issues most important to the community and help them address the issues that we're facing. Fifth, which is the most important thing for us, is lobby and petition local, state, and federal officials on issues that benefit our community both here and abroad. 6, create a society that is a participant in our democratic process. That's not just to go and vote, but to also be active in holding our leaders accountable. 7, provide political and public affairs advisory to local and federal Oromo communities. This is something that we intend to do in the long term, not necessarily in the short term, but it's still listed in our mission. 8, assisting candidate reach out to community and local leaders and actually sit down with Oromos to know what their needs are. We need not just vote for people because they come one day and say, we support the Oromo people. We have to hold them accountable and make them action-oriented. That is our #1 goal. And essentially to add on to that, I'm going to keep this very, very brief. We can complain about our problems and plead for our voices to be heard, but what history has shown us and we have learned is that we must take the initiative and build local political power in order to implement positive change. There's a saying that fits in this current time: there is no free meal. That applies to politics and or political and advocacy mobilization. That being said, I have immense faith in our community. Given what our ancestors have went through and what we are going through, I think we are a remarkable, phenomenal people, and we're able to do anything we set our minds to, and I think we have to strongly believe in that notion and not allow any negativity to disrupt the cause, whether it's domestic or internationally. And adding on to that, why we picked up on the caucus. I think all the presenters have said it. I don't need to go into the details. This crisis is nothing new. The Oromo people have been, I hate saying the term because the whole victimhood thing is getting old, have been oppressed for over a century. And what we're seeing back home is kind of a saying that this is about survival. There's no hope. There's nothing else, so we are going to allow ourselves to face live ammunitions as we're dying. The numbers tell us 440, but we don't know all the people that have been killed. I can pretty much estimate it's double that size, given the lack of free press in the country. So we have to do our part, is essentially what I'm saying, and our part is lobbying and to be united and to do everything within our power to do what we can to help these people. Otherwise, we're just going to go through the same recurrent crisis of genocide, ethnic cleansing, and dehumanization of the very people we ought to represent. So essentially, I will conclude this by saying we need your support. A few ambitious people getting together does not necessarily mean mobilizing the community. We need you guys to be present, and we need your support on a mass level. And as we're currently speaking, the Ethiopian government has a huge lobby in Washington, D.C., working on silencing dissent and pretty much pleading to the Western nations to allow them to commit these crimes. So we have a lot of work. And I would hope that all of you within this room take the responsibility to engage in that work. And yeah, so that will be all for me. We need your support. Thank you very much.